to talk about right skilling and the future of training in the era of the Great Resignation. Not sure if you are experiencing this, but definitely in North America, we are experiencing the Great Resignation very acutely. And I think that's because a lot of the labor laws are different here in North America, but you certainly are going to start to see it for those of you who are in Europe. It is happening. And how do I know it's going to happen? Well, I'm hearing from people who are preparing for this, who are actually actively saying, hey, I'm getting ready to leave my job. So this is something we need to be really prepared for as L&D professionals. And the fact is that we are in a very interesting place. We're heading into the fourth industrial revolution. Oh, I see, even I resigned. So applause to that. Congratulations, I've done it too, and I know the feeling. But we're also too, and Ivana as well, me too, just a couple of days ago. But we're heading into something very interesting in that this is the fourth industrial revolution. And there's a lot of fear that the robots are going to automate everything and we're not going to have jobs anymore and people are going to be made redundant. And the fact is the robots aren't taking over. What we need is over 1 billion people are going to need reskilling. And this isn't just a number that I pulled out of the air. This is actually coming from the World Economic Forum with their studies, where they're saying that just because jobs are changing, it doesn't mean that they go away. It means they get replaced with things that need new skills, which is definitely something that we as L&D professionals need to be prepared for. We're also seeing too the half-life of skills. What do I mean by that? It used to be that a skill is just at 5 years. It used to be 10. So it used to be that a skill that you acquired would last about 10 years in the workforce. Now that skill is half as valuable in 5 years as when you acquired it. So if you think about that and the things that you're learning right now and what your workforce knows right now, in 5 years, a lot of that is actually just going to be completely unneeded. And that's going to be a huge impact. Can robots resign? No, they cannot. But the thing with robots is that we design how the robots work, right? So there's all of these new skills that are going to be required. And with this, the World Economic Forum predicts we're going to have a net positive job growth, not decline. So what do they mean by that? So these jobs are going to go away. You're going to see that there's going to be some of this declination. However, but we're going to find that there's going to be job growth in areas with skills that we don't even know about right now, we can't predict, and skills that we don't have people who are prepared to work in those particular areas. And so that's very challenging and difficult here. And what do I mean by this? Well, we're not talking about leadership training, and we're going to talk a lot about this. Is that, you know, I see a lot of companies when they think of L&D, they think that it's like all of this stuff to help people grow in their roles, and those things are important, right? To right skill is definitely or to upskill is definitely important. However, it's also too about what I mean by right skilling. It's about how do you get people to be able to work and function in skills that they need in their jobs. So it's not necessarily about how they career progress, because we're always progressing, but this idea now where we all have lattice careers, not ladder, meaning going rung on rung upwards, we're maybe moving to the side a bit and then going up, and to the side a bit and then moving up. It's very different to the career progression that perhaps your parents experienced or your grandparents did, which is very much so. You started as a junior, then you became a manager, then a senior manager, VP, and so on. So we're not talking about just more leadership training, which is where I see a lot of L&D budgets actually get diverted towards. So we're going to start with the very first question here, since all of you are very active. And Molly, with the power of technology, hope it does not break. What percentage of your budget is spent on leadership training? Something I'm just always curious about.
The webinar. See some answers already coming in.
Yes, I can see the answers coming in. Interesting skew here that's happening. So we're seeing quite a bit come in here. So it's interesting. We are sitting at about 5-6%, or saying 50% or higher, which I think is very interesting. 42%, so that seems to be the majority, is sitting at 0 to 15%, which is, you know, I think that's healthy. And then we've got the 16 to 30% and the 31 to 40% here seems to be, you know, and again, almost a 50% in there. The reason I ask this question is because when we think about leadership training is something that L&D is typically tasked with doing. However, it really only touches a small proportion of your audience, and people and it's expensive. It's really, really, really expensive to run leadership training. And the efficacy, how well it actually works, is sometimes up for debate. If you want some interesting reading, if you go to Harvard Business School, they have an article called The Great Training Robbery. We can include that link. It's a very interesting reading because it basically is talking about leadership training and how effective is it. But I ask this question because I find it very, very interesting to look at how much of your budget you're actually putting on it. And it might be time for those of you who are in the higher proportions to think differently about that, about how much money you're putting in, because it's really only tackling a small group of people. And we think of all the skills that are needed for the rest of the population. That's, again, coming down to what we need to think of as reskilling. But then when we think about it, isn't all upskilling a good idea? Like, don't we always want our people to be learning and constantly learning? Isn't that a great thing if everybody's, you know, always, you know, taking e-learning and clicking next to continue, or they're in the classroom doing all the things that they're supposed to do? Well, not necessarily. We need to start thinking a little bit more targeted. So I'll give you an example. When I was in university 5 years ago, you know, I worked in a bank. That was where I earned my money. And what happened was, at the time, they were installing automated bank machines. And when I saw that, my first thought was, my job's gone. Okay, I'm not going to be able to pay my rent. Everything's going to be done by this machine, because every time somebody came into my branch, I had to say to them, you know, you can do that transaction on the bank machine. And I hated doing that because I was like, I'm putting myself out of a job. But what happened is my job actually didn't go away. What it meant was I had to upskill. I had to become a financial planner. I had to learn how to identify fraud. I had to learn to do a whole bunch of other skills that I didn't do before. So it was my role changed. We're also seeing this too happen with, for example, driverless cars. This one I find really particularly fascinating, in that we are already seeing driverless cars hit the market. In some areas of Germany, in fact, there are autobahns and sections that are dedicated just to driverless trucks. And yes, it did mean that some of those drivers, unfortunately, are out of work. Okay, that did happen. However, a whole bunch of new jobs opened up as a result of that. For example, people who are able to service the driverless trucks, logistics. There's a whole number of ethics that actually come behind driverless cars and the automation. We are the ones who program those machines, and they make split decisions. So in the event that, say, a dog runs into the road, what decision do we program those ethics? Do we unfortunately hit the dog, or do we swerve knowing that that might cause an accident? Do we protect our own cargo? Do we protect our own passenger? Who makes those decisions? Well, we do. It's not the robots. You can't just say the robots are doing it. So these are all the ways that skills are going to change, even with automation. These are things that we need to consider ourselves. Also, too, what's happening, what I find very interesting, and I go into a number of different companies. I typically work with, I know I didn't do an introduction. I'm assuming poor Molly had to do a little song and dance to keep the show on the road. Thank you so much. But I do work with a lot of enterprise clients. So this is typically companies with about 100,000 employees. And it's interesting because they will always say to me, we want a learning culture. I'm like, you have a learning culture, you just can't see it. I guarantee if you go onto WhatsApp or Slack or any of those places, people are sharing information. They always do. And these peer groups are where that information is coming from. Because the fact is that content libraries, they can't always keep up. And there's a lot of great ones out there. I'm not going to suggest not to have them. However, they can't keep up with the things that are bespoke and unique to an organization. So an example I like to give is Bitcoin. I probably shouldn't share this. I just joke. I was reading on Reddit that somebody described cryptocurrency as horoscopes for bros, which is a really awful thing to say, but I did laugh a little bit at it because we're hearing cryptocurrency everywhere. And I know I'm speaking from a Toronto standpoint, and we don't have Super Bowl, but we did see some of the advertising. I was amazed at how much cryptocurrency commercials there actually were. So this is becoming a thing. But what's interesting, if you follow some of the things that are happening with Bitcoin, is they have massive communities of peers that share information, rightly or wrongly. You want to be a little bit careful about some of that information, but they're all building up that community, and you now get crowdsourced solutions. That's what I find very interesting, because I do see that this is becoming the future of where a lot of learning is going, is that it's not just stuff that you're creating or that you're buying off the shelf, or you're creating even just as an L&D department. Because if you think about, L&D, it has to filter through a whole bunch of layers in order for it to actually become a piece of content. But the idea that you put that into the hands of the experts is quite interesting, and it's the only way that we're going to be able to navigate with that agility. So there's a lot of opportunities and roles that are starting to evolve in the future, no matter what industry you are in. And I know we had a ton of locations that we had in here, but these are the places where you as L&D professionals or as HR professionals, you need to have a magnifying glass to think about how you're going to be able to prepare for this in the future. So cybersecurity is a huge one. Right now, there are millions of jobs that we don't have people who can fill them. I know one major financial institution that we work with, about 6 months ago, they realized that they did not have enough people in cybersecurity. And so what they did is they went on the market, didn't matter location, they hired people even if they didn't have a job for them in cybersecurity. Why? Because they knew that they would not be able to operate safely as a bank using digital if they did not have that expertise. They basically just bought the market. Okay, so they just bought everybody up. And that was smart. It also created a shortage. And it also meant too that companies now who are looking for cybersecurity experts, they don't exist. You can't hire them. It's not a matter of just throwing more money at the problem. You have to be able to grow them internally. And that's where L&D has to shift. Environmental sciences, the care economy, aviation and transportation, as I mentioned before, as that starts going into automation, engineering, data and AI, cloud computing, ethics is probably the biggest one that we're seeing. And ethics is a really hard thing to teach with a capital T. And I think that's where a lot of the user-generated content and where we speak as humans and make some of these decisions becomes quite critical. So these are the areas that if you're in L&D, no matter what industry you're on, these are things that you're going to want to keep an eye on, because they are going to be opportunities in the future. As Candace says here, yeah, smart of the bank. Yeah, now in fairness, the bank, yes, they did pick a lot of cybersecurity experts, but there weren't that many. I mean, when I say that they picked up a lot, like I'm talking maybe they picked up about 500. We need a lot more cybersecurity experts. Okay, so this is something that's absolutely massive. And do keep the chat pod vibrant. You were really chatty before, so please feel free. I love the jokes as well. So if you have any questions or comments or anything that you want to add in, please do so. And yes, the recording will be made available to everyone, as well as the slides. I don't know if I want to see the first 5 minutes of this recording, because it'll be me trying to figure things out. And here, you know what? I thought I was doing so well today. I got Wordle in 3, and I was like, I am absolutely brilliant. This is going to be a good day. And little did I know what was going to happen. So thank you, everyone. Wordle in 3. Thank you, Debbie. I'm glad to hear you got that. So this is what I see happen a lot with companies. I call this the spray and pray. And what I mean by that is companies go, okay, we know the business is shifting. We know something's happening. I'm going to buy a generic content library, one that has something for everyone, and I'm going to throw it out there. Okay, and I'm going to just basically say it's for everyone. I won't name the company because I ethically can't, but this was a major manufacturer. This is the plan of their CLO. They basically said, I bought 3 content libraries, and I believe that all of my employees are adults. They can take whatever they want at any time, and it'll be great. Unfortunately, it's not. And what do I mean by that? Well, yeah, I mean, it's great that people are taking content and they have that autonomy, and you do want to give people the autonomy. But on the other hand, it also means too that you're just covering generic skills gaps, or maybe are they gaps at all? Anytime somebody takes a piece of content, I look at that as that's a price. It's not just their time, but it's also their effort, and sometimes it might even be their own personal time. It might be on, you know, at night, where they're in the evenings or whatever, when they're trying to upskill. And so you want to make sure that you're maximizing that, and that that's actually something that's going to be of worth to that employee. And the fact is when we look at these generic content libraries, not all, but some, they really designed content that will sell, not necessarily what companies need or what skills gaps exist as a company. So what you need to look at is to say, okay, what skills do I really need as an organization, and how do I drive people towards that? Because if you don't, I guarantee, and I've done this at nearly every engagement I've embarked upon with Niles-Hofmann, is we've looked at what content is, is most popular. It's usually one of 2 things: leadership training and Excel. And the Excel one I find very interesting, because I guess Excel is something that's always needed. People always struggle with it, and leadership, and that's why I started with leadership too in the beginning. That leadership's important, but you have to look at how much leadership do you actually need as a company. And if everybody becomes a leader, that's a problem. I had one person, director of learning, say, since COVID, this was last year, so it was like the first year of COVID, they said, our people completed so many hours of learning. And I said, yeah, but they're going to come back and I'll expect pay raises and promotions, because they've taken all of this learning, and it's not necessarily been aligned with what the business actually needed. And so that becomes a disconnect. And if you're an employee, it can become very frustrating, because you're investing in this learning that's not necessarily going to move you to where you need to be. Which is, again, why I'm talking about right skilling. It's that idea of looking at your workforce and seeing what gaps you need to function as a business, what skills do you have as an organization, and where do you need to fill some of those gaps. So when we talk about right skilling, it's 3 main buckets. And I just had a question here. When you mentioned about a bank hiring individuals in the cybersecurity field, how did they come about realizing the need and subsequently training them when they were already struggling with cybersecurity? I'm sure through trainings, but how did they decide on a starting point? This is a very interesting one. I can tell you, without disclosing the bank, is they were becoming victims of hacking. Basically, they had people. They had attacks on their financial systems. So they saw that was coming up, and that basically, when they brought in some consultants, they looked at it and said the level that your security is at is actually not the benchmark. And I mean, yeah, it meant that it met benchmarks, from a operating standpoint and regulatory standpoint. But as we know, I mean, cyber attacks are sophisticated, and they'll keep getting more and more sophisticated because they're trying to break in. So that was where they realized the gap, and when they looked at their teams, they weren't able to solve for those problems. So that was the first place. And what they did is this particular company, they went on the market to, as I said, to gather up as many as they could. But what they also did too is there are places that you can get upskilling, but certainly they were not ones that were available within the company. In fact, not to go on a tangent, but a lot of the upskilling, or a lot of the courses that are dedicated to cybersecurity, are actually done by hackers who used to be on the bad side, who are able to teach you on the good side, which I think is actually quite interesting. But that's how they determined it, is because they were looking at the vulnerability of their systems, and they were seeing that they were coming increasingly under attack. So when we think about right skilling, we need to think about, what do you need for business as usual? look around your organization, and all organizations are going to be different, but look at your KPIs. If you're in manufacturing, do you see that there's errors with inventory, shipping? What are the things that are happening? What are the gaps that are occurring? If you are in, say, pharmaceuticals, are you seeing particular things that are happening? You want to look across those and see if you can distill that using performance consultants to see as to whether it's a lack of skills. Sometimes it'll be a lack of support or infrastructure that you can't fix, but are there actual tangible skills? In the case of cybersecurity, that's what we could see, that the output was not meeting what they needed in the market. And then you need to think of this to break it down as a supply chain management of skills. Meaning you think about, okay, what skills do you need as an organization? What skills do you have? What skills are going to be redundant? I don't mean redundant in the sense of you're going to get rid of those people. I'm not talking about that. In fact, with right skilling, the goal is to retain people as much as possible. But it's to understand what some of those skills are that are no longer going to be needed and what you're going to need to grow people into. It's quite important. So that's thinking of it. And I don't like thinking about people as like supply chain widgets, because that's kind of cruel, but you do need to think about the skills in some of those ways. But those skills and knowledge are not just going to come from a course library. A course library is a great place to start, but that content is often so generic that you're also going to need to look at some of these skills are so rapidly evolving that they may only sit in one or two people within your organization, and you're going to need to get that information from them. Anytime I do a content audit, when I look at somebody's learning management system or learning experience platform, and I look at what's the most popular piece of content, I mean, I talked about Excel and leadership, but when it comes to the piece of content, inevitably, it's not from a course library. It's something that was done in-house. And it's usually somebody sitting on their mobile device who's recorded like a really poorly lit video, but it just has that nugget of knowledge that people absolutely need. Just want to pop in here. I see there's been some stuff in the chat here. Any recommendations, thoughts to what skills we as L&D practitioners should prioritize for the future? Very good question. We are absolutely becoming a part of this, and we ourselves need to think about what skills we need to do as L&D professionals. Definitely data analytics, UX, both of those are very good shouts. Believe it or not, learning experience design is, I see that Benoit has actually put that one in there. That's a very, very good one. If you're not familiar with learning experience design, it's not just about designing a course, it's designing the entire learning experience over a continuum and where people work and how people work. So it's learning those skills over a span of time, and what are the nudges and where are the intersections, where's the coaching, the feedback loops, all of those things happening together. Definitely learning experience design. I also have a couple of other shouts that I like to recommend. Journalism, which is one people tend to overlook, but writing for digital, journalists do that extremely well, and I think learning that is an extremely good skill, particularly if you are doing digital content. I also think too, the skill that L&D professionals typically lack, particularly at the senior levels, is business acumen, to really understand how businesses operate. I often, will ask companies, can you show me your strategy? And their learning strategy will always be, how many hours of learning, how many courses they're going to develop, all of these things. And I say, okay, but how does that relate to the business? How are you helping the business make money, save money, or mitigate risk? Those are all things. So business acumen, journalism, learning experience design, those are all things that L&D professionals should be having a look at. Storytelling, podcasting, yes, those to me fall kind of under the journalism as well. It's all about how you're using digital media effectively. We tend to put a lot of textbooks on screen, or we add an avatar to make it interesting, or a drag and drop, but that we can do so much better. And so really the storytelling, I think, is an excellent one. There's a really good piece actually by Jampan about skills of the future for L&D professionals. That's probably also too worth a look at. Question here, sometimes teams can't completely agree on what skill versus job task, especially in manufacturing. We talk about skills, many SMEs talk about specific tool knowledge and competencies. Okay, this is going to go down a rabbit hole, so I may not get to this because there's a lot of other things we still need to cover. But I think for that, you really almost need to do a level set at the beginning so that everybody is really clear, so that it's not something you're dealing with every single time one of these issues come up. So it's becoming a level set for what L&D does, what L&D does not, what communications does, what communications does not, what support does, and what support does not. Okay, so that's really rethinking the entire user experience. Sorry, that's a high-level answer, but I could probably go on for about half an hour, and we don't want to do that. So that's something to think about. Angela, we'll make sure that we put some resources in so that you do have that when we send this out. One of the challenges Jason puts in is buy-in and the willingness to move out of comfort zones and away from routines. Take calculated risks. Okay, for that, you're absolutely right. For that, data is your superpower. Okay, so you can take calculated risks, but sometimes what I've done is maybe done something and then just ask for forgiveness after on something that's small, because then if I have the data, it becomes really important. So for example, when people come to you and say, I need everybody upskilled in X, okay, what evidence of need do you have? Where's the data for that? Typically they won't have it, and that's when you can start to shift the conversation. Again, that's a topic I could go on and on and on and on about, which I won't do, but that's quite critical. And Lulu asks, how can you measure the impact of training on the business? Okay, a lot of deep questions here. For that, what I always say is you can't measure the impact if you haven't started from a place of need. Meaning, when people say, well, I'd like this, and this on my annual plan, what evidence, as I was mentioning before, what evidence of need do you have of that? If you don't, you're basically setting yourself up into a cycle where you're just building because you were asked, and then you have to kind of measure impact, which doesn't make any sense. So if I say, okay, people need coaching because we saw that it's coming up on our exit surveys, it's coming up on our employee engagement surveys, okay, so people do need coaching. I expect that then when I measure after the learning, I should see some of those measurements move into a better direction because I started with that evidence. If I haven't started with that evidence, then what am I really doing? Okay, I'm trying to shake clouds, and so it doesn't make much sense. But again, there's lots that we could go on about that. So, but I think that it's starting with that evidence of need. So here's a way to think about about right skilling, and this is an example. I hope nobody is too hungry right now. I think about it in terms of tomatoes. So think of tomatoes as skills, okay? And talent management can tell you how many tomatoes are available on the market. They'll tell you how many, what cost they are. Do you need to import them? Were there good growing conditions? So we have good ones this year, and how much were they going to cost? Whereas L&D is kind of like the farmers. They'll be able to tell you how long is it going to take to grow a tomato? What do I need for that? What greenhouse do I need? How much water, how much sunlight, all of those things do I need in order to develop that tomato, that skill? You say tomato, potato, but we think about these two sides of things, and a lot of times L&D is not speaking to talent management. That's a huge disconnect. So talent is seeing the landscape and seeing like cybersecurity skills, and they're seeing that that's a deficit. But by the time that trickles off to L&D, think about it: to create a cybersecurity expert, that's actually about 18 months, if not longer. So you need to be talking as soon as possible in order to have that relationship, because you're going to be needing to build that. It's quite important. So your first step, one of the things to think about is, if you haven't already, reach out to talent. They should be your BFFs, your best friends forever, because the two of you, again, you're basically both trying to ensure that you have enough tomatoes to run your pizza factory. You have to make sure that you're in lockstep. So here's another thing where we talk about that relationship. Talent, they are the ones who are going to say, yep, here's the demand and here's where we have shortages. And L&D can think about how long it's going to take to develop those skills and devise a strategy, so you both work together and you're clear on what that effort is, and that's going to make it work for the organization. All right. So the other thing that you want to think about is there's a lot of skills are already available within your company. There's always that one person who sits off in the corner who your whole organization cannot run without them. But they're usually just not at the scale of needed. I have to be honest. One of the best things I ever saw. There's a bagel shop near my house, and they have a gentleman who I guess but every 15 minutes the bagels come off of the assembly line in the store out of the oven. They fall down, and this guy he's probably 92 or 93 years old. As they fall down, he stands up and he goes, "Bagels!" and people run from the back and they package them all up. And I just thought, wow, that's a skill. He's so good at it. He knows when it's going to happen. And I asked, why don't you automate it? And they said, well, we need this, right? Because it's just, we didn't want a buzzer. It's just nicer. So anyway, that was just I thought that was quite funny. But what you need to be able to look at is these niche skills have to be cross-pollinated. I call this corporate amnesia, which is when you have skills within your company that, it belongs to one person and either that person leaves with the Great Resignation. If we think about that, these are people who are highly skilled. They have hypermobility. They are in demand and they are moving on. So we need to think about how we get that information from them, not just because we want to stick a vacuum cleaner on their head, a Hoover, and suck out all the information because we know they're going to leave. That's terrible. But because we also want to elevate them and we want to get their expertise so that they can help other people and give them some leadership there. So we want to talk about that skills exchange. And that's also increasingly why I was eager to partner with Easy Generator, because that tool has the ability to harness that information that's within individuals rather than just going to the large course library, which is very generic, because that's the content that people really need. We have the question about manufacturing, and those are tools and systems that are specific to that company. You can't just buy something for that. And so those are really, really clear here. So question for you, what is your relationship like between learning and talent management? To quote Taylor Swift, we are never ever getting back together. I see them around. We've been out a few times together, or we're BFFs. Oh, the first person I see here was we are never ever getting back together. Okay, that was somebody's like, yep, didn't like them. So we've got quite a bit. While those are answering, I also too just wanted to go back to a question here that came from, oh, hi, Hora. Thank you. I didn't see that was you that put that in. Yeah, TikTok recently dissolved their whole L&D department because they said they just created feel-good moments. I have a lot of thoughts about that. It's worth having a look. I mean, my first thought on that is, yeah, it was a good decision. I also look at it and say, how did it get that bad? Because any company that hires 100 people and has them operating for 18 months and then lets them go, I kind of question who was at the helm of that, who was leading that, because that shouldn't have gotten into that state. But I think it's yeah, they had their 15 seconds. Yes, they did. I guess maybe, yeah, that's the TikTok way, right? If it doesn't, you swipe past it if it doesn't work. But that's very true. Okay, so I see here. So we do see about 30% are BFFs. I think that's great. You're doing definitely the right thing. For the other ones who are, just sort of, we see them around and friends, this is a relationship you may want to look at strengthening. That's something that you may want to look at. How can you get that come together? Because again, think of that tomato analogy. Can you get those people coming together? Because I think that's going to help you again to right skill your organization. But it also means too that we have to rethink how we operate as an L&D function. Typically we get the requests from our stakeholders. There's an annual plan that we were dedicated to, and the requests come trickling down. That creates it's an awful lot of time, and it really results in inconsistent performance consulting, and we have different departments, and then we get duplication, particularly if you're in an enterprise type scenario, and that can be incredibly challenging for a company. So we need to be able to look at data, and I know the data question came up earlier. We were talking about evidence of need. These are data sources that you want to be looking at as an organization, and you can actually get a lot of these. Easy Generator has a really amazing dashboard, but I like to look at all the things that are on here. Search terms, what are people looking for in real time? Are people completing things? I'm going to talk about completions in a second. Goal setting, what are people, what do they have in their goals? You can usually get that data extracted. Google Analytics is an interesting place to go. Your HRIS system, any project management software, these are all places where you can find where there are skills gaps, or at least evidence of potential skills gaps. Remember, not everything is going to be a skills gap, but these are places where you can find some of that information. So it's a really good place to have a look. But regarding completions, this is something people really look at. I think we had somebody from Calgary. This is actually a story from Calgary. This was a restaurant. It had a camera installed in the kitchen, and what it uncovered was the manager, without a glove, just bare hands, before COVID, sticking his hand into a barbecue sauce, a tub of barbecue sauce, stirring it around, wiping it off, and then using it on chicken. Sorry for anyone who's eating. Yeah, cringe, kind of gross. All right, but what happened here was very interesting. Is the statement noted, Webb, that was his surname, he'd completed his annual health certification, his food safety training, and got 96%. This is the statement they put out in the news. This was their official PR response, which to me really comes down to, you know, completions versus other insights. Just because they completed, exactly, knowledge is not behavior, and we get very, you know, caught up in that. That person knew they shouldn't, you know, stick their hand inside the barbecue sauce, but they did it anyway. Okay, so that's a whole other issue. So we also too, when it comes to data, we want to be looking at some other types of insights. 4% missed. Yeah, it was all about the hands. I guess your hands are about 44% of your body, so maybe that was the part that they forgot that they shouldn't put in the barbecue sauce. But always remember too, when you're looking at all this data and the data sources that I was talking about, make sure it's anonymized. Each country has their own data privacy laws, as well as your company will have that. And correlation is not causation. As I like to say, you know, Canadians, we tend to, you know, our average lifespan is 86 years. We all love maple syrup. Doesn't mean that maple syrup prevents us from living to 100. It doesn't kill us, okay? So, you know, correlation is not causation. So make sure that you get those right. And Candace says, with data sources, what about qualitative data? Absolutely. Company surveys are a good source, speaking with people. With qualitative data, though, that's where you want to make sure you have somebody who really understands how to use qualitative data, because that's when you can go down that rabbit hole of correlation versus causation. So it is definitely worth upskilling yourself a little bit on that, so you make sure that you're doing that effectively. But really, really good point. Your skills inventory. All right, this is what you want to look at, what you yourself are using to measure the skills within your organization. There's a lot of places where you can get some of this data. HR probably has some of this. If you have a talent management system or a talent marketplace, those are starting to become very hot technologies. And L&D, as for L&D professionals, you need to have an eye on what those are. You may have a skills taxonomy that you're using as an organization. Some companies will scrape your LinkedIn data, which I find very interesting, because I love the titles you can put on LinkedIn. Like I could put, like, I'm a CEO, or, you know, of whatever. There's no data validation, which I find very interesting. But what I do find is also coming up is the blockchain of skills. We are already seeing that in the IT space. If you go on GitHub, they actually are using blockchain to actually validate. So if you say I worked on a particular project, and the scale and scope of that needs to be validated by your peers before it is able to appear on your blockchain CV, which is very interesting. Yeah, Data Wizard, Big Kahuna. I saw somebody call themselves the Big Peach. I don't know. I guess you can. CEO of the universe. Although, to be fair, I've trained my Siri to call me Empress, which is like the best thing I ever did. It just validates me every single day. It just is like, well, Empress, and it just makes me feel good. But these are all sorts of ways that you as your organization should be looking at some of the talent you have. So basically, it's talking about how many, not just how many tomatoes do you have, but how many cucumbers, how many onions do you have? All of those things are things you should know as an organization. So a chat pod question for you. Do you inventory your skills, and how? If yes, I'd love to hear how you're doing that in the chat. And if no, a lot of no's. And don't be worried about that. That's why we're here, because we're all trying to see, what are some good practices. For those of you who have answered yes, so that's about 1 in 4, it's looking like. I'd love if you just want to pop into the chat, some of the things that that you are doing, or 1 or 2 words about how you're doing some of that. Okay, so it's actually now skewing to about okay, still 20, about 1 in 4 are not doing the inventory skills. It's a hard thing to do. It is definitely a challenge for organizations because they may not have the infrastructure of the organization to be able to do that. Internal surveys. Skills are perishable. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about, Michael. Exactly. The skills are perishable. The half-life of skills is declining. So we need to understand tomatoes don't last forever. So we need to, to definitely have that. Cornerstone AI is a very good one. A regular skills audit, HRIS, employee-led sharing on social platforms, very good. A lot of times too, people, they'll use either a Yammer, for example, that does have a skills inventory. A lot of these things that are coming up, different needed skills and a skills matrix, very, very good. Cross with Gardner, very, very good example there. So a lot of really good places. Regarding the question there about finding out more about blockchains of skills, I would actually have a look at GitHub because they're the ones who are using it exactly. I can't speak to a specific article, but if you just Google GitHub and blockchain, I'm sure you'll get quite a few hits. Tableau, SQL, Agile project management, yeah, all of those things as well. Lots and lots of surveys. Not sure how they're used about L&D. Well, L&D, yeah, we definitely need to have a look at those. That's why we're here. That's what we're talking about. There's other places to have a look at. So very good. That, and it's also time to raise the alarm. This is something that I see quite a bit. You talk at the CEO level, and they get that they need new skills. They're not, with their head in the sand. They understand that. However, they don't really understand how to do it. So a lot of times they will just simply say, I want more hours of learning, or show me how many completions, or show me the test scores, make sure that, people are, and how are people happy with the learning? They're not thinking strategically about that. So that's something that you need to be thinking about. So they also need to understand that skills being freely available on the market, it's magical thinking, especially now too with the Great Resignation. Location doesn't matter for people. They're looking for more flexibility. They will change jobs. This is really becoming that the war on talent is quite critical, and so that's something that we need to really raise the alarm to that level for them to understand that also too, if they want people to be upskilled, they're going to need to make an investment. They're going to need to give people the time, if they are an expert, to share their skills, not just add it on to their job as something that they have to do, but to actually ensure that it is something that they have the time and the space and the endorsement to do. So creating that space is really quite important. And to go with the data, look at some of those data sources and do some prototyping on that to be able to show where you're able to actually move the needle. And I believe actually that at the end of this, Molly, if you maybe just want to talk for a second about what people are able to contact Easy Generator about on the back of this.
Kind of learning strategy within your organization, Easy Generator can definitely offer some advice as well. So if you're interested in discussing with a learning expert about that, you can definitely schedule a call with someone over here. And I can actually, you'll see something on your screen quickly that will pop up. So you can do that if you are so interested. But yeah, definitely something we can help with as well.
Perfect. I also see here skill sharing in practical applications is valuable. However, as Jason points out, in some fields it presents its own risks, such as the medical field. Absolutely. I mean, you always want to make sure that you're putting things through a lens as to your own industry and what's going to be applicable. Not everything can work in for everyone. So the things that we're talking about here are just more as conversation starters, thought starters for you to think about ways you can approach right skilling within your organization. And Ina asks the process of skills evaluation before you put them on a matrix. Ooh, okay, that's a really big one. I think it's really about looking at start with some of the skills taxonomies that already exist. Don't try and build your own. Take from that what ones you think are applicable to your industry and start to filter from there. That's a very basic answer for something that really would take a much longer explanation, but that's a good place to start. Don't please don't try and create your own skills taxonomy. I see that all the time. It'll be out of date as soon as you publish it. Leave that to people who have the resources and time to dedicate to that. The other thing too that I think we also need to do is to question the experts. Things are so radically different than what they were before. We've been through a huge amount of change. I have an ABC rule, anything but COVID, when it comes to talking about things. But we've never been in such a time of change, and this is a really important thing, because we need to start to look for tangible results, not just the stories. Question what's too good to be true. There's a lot of investment going into ed tech and industry right now, and some of it's really good, some of it's actually absolutely amazing, and but some of it you also too want to have another look at, and really make sure that what's out there is really going to be applicable to your business. And really, how do you connect what you are doing with the business, rather than what TikTok complained about the feel good things. We did a lot of feel good stuff. I mean, I remember, I'm old enough to remember in the 90s where actual training, if you can believe it, was trust falls, where you used to go like this and fall backward, and all of your colleagues would catch you. Walking on coals was another one. We used to have to abseil or rappel off of the side of a building. I don't know why we did these things, but they were all about creating an experience. And now I think that doesn't create the skills. The skills are the things that we actually need to be looking at. So we want to question some of the things that we thought before. We're also in a very different time. Yeah, trust falls during remote learning are absolutely rubbish. Yes, you don't want to do that. Definitely not. But these were the things we did. This was the 90s. But I always like to leave things with a to-do list. For those of you who, the 3 out of 4 that don't have maybe that close relationship with talent, now is a really good time. Have a virtual coffee with them, or if you can meet in person, please do. Look at the data of what's available, and what you're seeing. Really focus on that slide where I was talking about some of the data points where you can start to see some things in your organization, rather than waiting for stakeholders to bring it to you, because you want to be far more immediate. Spray and pray, there's no quick fixes, right? It takes time to learn these skills. Maybe look at some of the funding that's going into your leadership programs and say, how do I divert these back to skills that actually have tangible business needs, and that tackle maybe the other 80 or 90% of the organization, because they need that support, and they're the ones that actually often have that niche learning. You also too want to look at a bottom-up democratized learning model. How do you empower people who have the knowledge to be able to share that with the rest of the organization? Creating that time and space. That's something you can do with Easy Generator, but it's also a mindset. It's something that you need to have leadership also agreeing to, and understanding that people. I've seen a lot of organizations, knowledge becomes currency or power, so they hold on to it. No, you want to be in a place where you're able to share some of that. And again, thinking of that supply chain management of skills in a radically different way, not just saying here's a content library, everybody, that's your buffet. No, think of your employees as people who are training for a marathon. You don't want them just eating the mac and cheese, because I know that's what I go to at the buffet. Macaroni and cheese, my favorite, but that's not really going to help me, run the marathon. Marathon requires everyday specific, minerals and vitamins and thought behind and calorie counts and all those things, in order to be able to truly have that person prepared for the challenges ahead. So we don't know the future, but we want to figure out right skilling at scale. Here are some people that I do recommend following. I always try and give a little bit of a shout out to people who are far smarter than I in the industry, that you may want to look at some of the things that they have and that they're publishing. So please do give them a follow on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I think all of these people have their own websites as well. So definitely worth having a look at. And start with the practical. Don't try and do everything at once. If anything, think of 1 or 2 skills within your organization that you can tackle, and act from there. And again, Red Thread, yeah, I love Red Thread. They're amazing. They do some really good leadership work, and in the industry and in the HR space as well. Definitely worth a follow. And as Molly mentioned, you can certainly schedule a call with an e-learning expert. This is a rare opportunity, so definitely do take advantage of that.